Hello everyone, today I would like to talk about Unit 27, Conditional Sentences. And for conditional sentences, so there are altogether 4 types. So we call them types 0, 1, 2, and 3. And today I would like to focus on the first 2 types of conditionals. So which is the 0 conditional, so usually we call it type 0. And then the first conditional, so which is type 1. Okay, so first of all, let's take a look at the first type, which is type 0. So when is it used? So before we talk about the usages, so can you please take a look at this example here? Okay, so if you don't water plants, they die. So for this sentence, so there are altogether 2 parts here. So for the first part, with, okay, the if, okay, with the if at the very beginning of a sentence, so this is what we call the if clause. So for the if clause, actually, we talk about the condition. Okay, so we talk about the condition, and then with the comma in between, and then the second part of the whole sentence, so this is what we call the main clause. This is the main clause, and this is the result. So we talk about the result in the main clause. Okay, so let's get back to the usages of conditional type 0. So when do we use type 0? So basically, we use type 0 with these two conditions. So the first one is, so when we want to talk about general truths, okay? When we want to talk about general truths, and then we use conditional type 0. Just like the example sentence here. If you don't water plants, so they must die. And that's why they die instead of they will die. Okay, so they die, and that's why we have to use type 0 here in this case. And besides talk about general truths, and we should also use conditional type 0 to talk about scientific facts. Something about science, okay, something about the science experiments. If we heat water to 100 degrees Celsius, so in the if clause here, so what happens? So it boils because this result must happen, and that's why we use type 0 here. So what about the form? How does conditional type 0 look like? So just like what I've just talked about, so for the if clause, which is the condition, okay, so we have to fulfill this condition first, and that's why we use simple present tense. Simple present tense here. And then for the main clause, which is the results clause here, so it must happen, okay, because we are talking about general truths, or we are talking about some scientific facts, so this is something must happen, and that's why we are also using simple present tense in the main clause. Okay, so just like this example, if you look at this example again, for the if clause here, so we have to fulfill this condition, and then we use simple present tense here, don't water plants. And then for the main clause here, so to talk about the results, so this is something that must happen, and that's why we are also using simple present tense, and that's why they die. Okay, so after talking about type 0, so let's talk about type 1. So the first conditional here. Okay, so how do we use? Okay, so when do we use conditional type 1? When we want to talk about real present. If the present situation is real, and then the future should be possible. Okay, so that's something, okay, should happen. That something will happen. Okay, and that's why we say for the future it may be true, it may not be true, okay, but usually it will happen. Okay, it will happen. So this should be something that will happen in the future, and that's why let's look at the example sentences here for the if clause. Okay, so this is the if clause. So I say we have to fulfill the present situation. Okay, so we have to fulfill this condition. So for this present situation, so this is something real. if it rains, okay? Even though we say tomorrow morning here, it seems that it should be something in the future, right? However, for type 1, okay, for the if clause, so we should be using simple present tense, okay? So no matter like which time frame we are talking about. And then for the main clause here, we will cancel the picnic because if it rains tomorrow, so the result should happen. It may be true, and usually, okay, we will cancel the picnic. But of course, there might be some exceptional cases that we may still, okay, so we may still be going there. But anyways, so this is the possible future, okay, this is the possible future. And then we have the second example sentence here. If you are hungry now, I will make you some pancakes. So for the main clause, for the results here, so this should be something that may be true, okay, that may happen in the future. I will make you some pancakes, okay? Maybe I will make you something else, okay? I will give you something else, okay? But most likely, I will make you some pancakes. And that's why in these cases, we are using type 1 instead of type 0. Okay, because for the result, so this is something that may happen in the future. Okay, but not 100% sure that that something will happen. Okay, so let's take a look at, how it is formed, which means the form of it. How does it look like for the if clause? Okay, for the if clause, because I say this is the real present. The present situation is real. And that's why, okay, we are also, same as conditional type 0, so we are also using simple present tense in the if clause for type 1. Okay, but then for the main clause, it's a bit different, okay, from type 0. Because for type 0, so the result must happen, and that's why we use simple present tense. But then for the conditional type 1, so for the future, so this should be something that may happen. Okay, that may happen. It's very likely to happen, but we are not 100% sure that that something, okay, will happen. And that's why we are using simple future tense. And that's why will plus a bare infinitive, just like will do, will go, will watch, just like this one. If you want to read the book, okay, if you really want to read the book, I will lend it to you, okay? So very likely, I will do something like this, okay? But then I'm not 100% sure that I will lend it to you, and that's why we use type 1. And actually, type 1 is the most commonly used type of conditionals, okay? Okay, so I would like to talk about, I would like to give you some more information, okay, about how we use conditional type 1, okay? So let's look at them one by one. The first one is, we're actually in the main clause, okay, so which means possible future, and usually we use simple future tense, right? We use will plus a verb there. But then, okay, so for the meaning, so if we are talking about permission, if you want to get permission from someone else, okay, so instead of using will, so you can also use can or may, okay? For example, so at this time, we put the main clause at the very beginning of the sentence. Okay, you can borrow my camera. You may borrow my camera if you want to take some photographs. So this time, we put the if clause, okay, in the second part of the whole sentence, and then we put the main clause here, and then the if clause here. Okay, so instead of using you will borrow my camera or you will borrow my camera, so if we talk about permission, because you are asking, okay, because you are, so you are telling others that they can do something, so permission, so we can also use can or may in the main clause, okay? Of course, if we talk about possibility, we can also use may, might, or could. If the number 3 typhoon signal is hoisted tomorrow morning, so this time we are using passive voice, ferry services, Okay, so of course it's okay if you use will be suspended. Okay, it's okay. Okay, so if you use will be suspended. Okay, but we are trying to use some other cases. Okay, if we are talking about possibility, so we can also use may be suspended, might be suspended, could be suspended. Okay, and of course, when we want to talk about ability, whether you are able to do something, whether you can do something or not. So we are using can or could. If you work hard, you can learn to create an app in no time. You could learn to create an app in no time. But of course, if you would like to use will, that will be perfectly okay. Okay, that will be perfectly okay. Okay, so another case here. So for the if clause, just like what I've told you, okay, for conditional type 1 in the if clause, and then we are using simple present tense, okay? But, okay, in this case, if we are less sure about a possibility, we can also use another word there, so which is should. I don't think Sally is going to the party this evening, but if I should see her, because I'm not very sure if I will see her, okay, if I should see her, I will give her your message. But of course, it's also okay to just use if I see her, I will give her your message. It's okay, of course. Okay, but then in some cases we want to like talk about different degrees, okay, of possibility. Okay, so when we use should, we can, this is a very special case here. Okay, so when we use should, we can omit the if here and then begin the clause with should, which means here, so can't you get, okay, let's take a look at, okay, the differences, okay, the differences between the first sentence and the second sentence here. Okay, so for the first sentence, we say, if I should see her, I will give her your message. Okay, actually, we are making changes to the if clause here. So usually we begin the if clause with the if, okay, but then it's also okay to start with should. But of course, if you start with should, so we won't be using any if there. Okay, so should I see her at the party, I will give her your message. So if you are really using should, so after should, you have to give me the subjects. Okay, which means you have to swap, you have to change the places of I and should here. So first of all, you cross out if, and then you swap the places, okay, you swap the places of should and I. Should I see her at the party, comma, I will give her your message. Okay? So this is a very special use, okay, of should in the if clause in conditional type 1. Okay, so for the last thing, okay, number 3, so we can also use any expressions that give advice or to make suggestions or requests in the main clause. Okay, which means, okay, so besides using will, so will is the like most commonly used sentence pattern, okay, here. But if you really want to talk about advice or like making suggestions or requesting something, we can also use all these expressions. If you don't feel well, you'd better see a doctor. You had better see a doctor. You should stay in bed. You ought not to be working now. Why don't you? And then we use a bare infinitive here. Would you like me to call a doctor? So we can use all these expressions in the main clause in conditional type 1. Okay? But of course, okay, so if you really want to like play safe, okay, if you really want to play safe, so you can simply use will plus a verb there, okay, for the main clause for conditional type 1. Okay? Okay, so I hope that you have a better idea of like the usages and the forms of the first 2 types of conditionals. Thank you.